All right, worker problems. Okay, so pay and hours worked. There were long hours. You would work from 8 to 12 hours a day, most times 12 hours a day. You're working 6 days a week instead of 5, and you're getting paid about $1 a day for that work. So productivity went up because of mass production, and the standard of living actually increased as well. So as people built more stuff quickly in the factories, the price of those goods came down, and Americans were more free to purchase everything, pretty much. So in the West, with the closing of the frontier and the elimination of cheap Western land, settlers stayed in cities, providing industry with a reliable labor supply. Thus, workers were more dependent on business. With the railroad causes competition between different sections of the country. Cheap Southern labor forced Northern wages to decrease while shutting down small local stores. All right, striking was illegal at the time. In fact, being in a union was illegal at the time. We passed a law in 1890 called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was supposed to stop trust companies. Well, unfortunately, the Supreme Court was paid off to say that that law wasn't about trust companies at all. In fact, it was about labor unions. So the Sherman Antitrust Act was used to make labor unions illegal in the United States. And for a long time, you had to hide all your union activity. Labor unions were created to take advantage of collective bargaining, which gave workers much more negotiating strength. So a labor union is basically a club of workers, and the more people you have in the club, the more power you have to achieve change from the boss. So if you want to get a raise or something like that, it helps to have 100 people in your labor union rather than just 1 or 2 guys asking for a raise from the boss. You're much more likely to get your pay increase. Unions met in secret. Okay, they met in secret because being in a union was illegal because of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Employers would counter union efforts with lockouts and hire scabs or non-union workers. Okay, so let's say that we want to go on strike, right? Now, a lot of workers in factories, before they would go on strike, they would sabotage the machines so that way the boss couldn't bring in new workers to run the machines. So they would destroy machines. They would take pieces off of it and throw it away and stuff like that. And when the bosses started to catch on to this, when they heard that a strike was coming, they would kick everybody out of the factory and they would lock the doors. This is called a lockout. And then they would hire scabs, which are replacement striking workers, to replace the people that went on strike. And these scabs were typically African Americans because black people, because of racism back then, were not allowed in the regular union apprenticeship programs. So as soon as the white folks all went on strike, black people were ready and eager to get those jobs, to snatch those jobs. And they worked their butts off during a strike. They wanted to show the boss that they were the ones that deserved to have the job even after the strike was over. So employers also had the support of government at the time because the government was paid off by the big robber barons. Okay? All right, let's talk about labor union history here. Again, a labor union is a group of workers that gets together to band together and get something out of the boss. Usually higher pay, but it could be better working condition, maybe better hours, maybe better lighting in the factories and stuff like that, you know. So the National Labor Union is America's first national union, formed by William Silvis in 1866. The union sought to unite all American workers. The union persuaded Congress to legalize an 8-hour day for government workers. That was part of the progressive platform, the populist platform as well. So Uriah Stevens organizes the Knights of Labor in 1868 and uses arbitration. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Arbitration is whenever you're having an argument between the boss and the workers, and you bring in a neutral third party, someone that's not involved, and they decide who's right and who's wrong. Okay, so Uriah Stevens used arbitration, where workers in employment select a neutral third party to settle differences. Terence Powderly of 1881 led the workers in a successful strike. The union collapsed after losing a railroad strike to Jay Gould, who was another railroad robber baron. One major problem of early unions was that they concentrated on social issues instead of worker problems. So they're talking about women's rights and things like that, things that have nothing to do with workers' pay. And so a lot of people didn't want to go on strike for women's right to vote. Okay? They wanted to go on strike to get a higher paycheck. That was the thing. So labor became strongly anti-immigrant, believing that it cost them jobs. This is nativism. We talked about nativism earlier this chapter. People that were born here in America believe that they should have more rights than people that come to America later on in life. The American Federation of Labor was organized with Samuel Gompers as president, and the union's main weapon was the strike, and it concentrated on work-related issues only. You're going to find that each labor union I talk about that came later, they solved the problems of the earlier labor unions. So now we're only worried about workers' problems. We learned from the last labor union we talked about, and the AFL organized the various crafts into a federation of separate unions. So this is important, y'all. Let's say you have carpenters, you have electricians, you have plumbers, right? Well, in the AFL, they would each have their own union. So if the carpenters went on strike, the electricians or the painters wouldn't have to go on strike, which is something they're solving from the old labor unions that we just talked about, which is in the early days, if the carpenters wanted to go on strike, the electricians and the painters and all those people, they had to go on strike too. Well, the thing was they were constantly on strike and they weren't making any money. So the AFL fixes that situation. And the failure of one local union would not destroy the whole organization because of that. So, John Lewis created the United Mine Workers, and during the Great Depression, the Congress of Industrial Organization as well. Okay, here we go, y'all. Why did the Knights of Labor hold secret meetings? Okay, well, it's because it was illegal to be in a labor union. So they were afraid of being arrested for criminal activities. All right, our next one. Labor unions resorted to work stoppages. I hate this question. Okay, first of all, what is a work stoppage? It's when you stop working, right? Why can't they just say a strike? Because all of y'all know now what going on strike means, right? So let's reread that. Labor unions resorted to strikes, okay, not showing up to work to get a benefit, to secure better wages and working conditions. How did business leaders most frequently respond to these work stoppages? All right, so whenever the boss figured out that you and your people were going on strike, they wouldn't want you to destroy the factory. So what they did was a lockout. They locked workers out of the factories and they hired scabs. And again, the scabs were usually black people because they were not allowed in the unions at first. Eventually, they're going to get into the unions. All right. Why was the rise of labor unions in the late 19th century regarded as a threat by big business? Okay, so a business only considers a labor union a threat because the amount of people can really hurt the business if they go on strike. So which one is going to be there? Let's go with C. Okay, it gave workers better negotiating strength. Okay, this is called collective bargaining. All right.